Well, good morning and welcome back to Elevenses. It's show number 360. It's the 23rd of August and I'm back with a live show after a week or so off. First of all for a bit of holiday and then at a 40th wedding anniversary. So what have I got for you in today's show? Well, we have the news that the BMF have quit FEMA. We'll be asking why that was. How big was the turnout for the protest ride around the M25 in the protests, the ongoing protests against the London ULEZ zone? If you're going to attract the police, one way to do it is to have a flip-up plate. Jarrod Frost has nicked the standing mile record from Guy Martin at Elvington, and we'll have a look at a brand new bike which has appeared in Spain, which appears to be a sporty 660 Daytona. And we'll also be asking if a 1000cc adventure tourer is on the way from Suzuki. And finally, in today's in-depth look at a particular biking problem, particularly serious one actually, we'll be asking about the forgotten collision, one out, one in, and why this is a killer crash at junction. So stay with me all the way to the end of the show for that one. Let's crack on first of all with the news. Now, if as I say, welcome back to the show. If you're new here, then that's great. If you're regular, that's also great. The show is kind of split into three chunks. I'll be looking at some topical news. We'll then look at some news about motorcycles themselves, and then finally I'll be doing the in-depth bit at the end of the show. So on with the news element now. Congratulations first of all to the Lionesses and commiserations for not winning the final. I would dare say quite a few of you wouldn't have been live with me at 11 o'clock on Sunday, even if I had have run a live show, because you'd have been watching the telly. But one thing I was interested to hear was one of the former England players in the commentary box saying how she believed she would have got far more out of her game if she'd have been introduced to sports psychology earlier in her career. Now, if you are a regular on the Survival Skills Facebook page or my coffee page, or even online here, you probably know that I am a great believer in the power of sports psychology in how we can improve our own performance on motorcycles. So I was really interested to hear that, and I will be coming back to the topic on a later show, I'm sure. So, alright, today's show starts with a pair of riders' rights stories, and the first involves the British Motorcyclists Federation, the BMF. Now, just at the point when most of Britain seems to be thinking that the move to rejoin the EU is better than staying out, the BMF management team and the BMF Council have jointly voted to leave the Federation of European Motorcyclists Associations, FEMA. The BMF say that for the last 40 years, most legislation that affected UK riders was formulated in the EU, and that's why they were in fact founder members of FEMA. But the BMF argue with a hard Brexit now in the past, it's become increasingly clear that UK riders will have to fight legislation that affects them here in the UK, and that, quote, we can no longer depend on FEMA to do that for us. As an EU-based organisation, it is of declining relevance and utility to UK riders. Looking to the future, this will increasingly be the case. Now, it's actually an increasing polarisation between the two UK riders' rights groups, since the BMF are members of the UK National Motorcycle Council, and that's an organisation from which MAG have withdrawn, but MAG are still members of FEMA, the organisation which the BMF have just pulled out from. Now, the fact is, if you are honest about this, the UK will continue to be affected by EU legislation, whether we're in or out of the EU, simply because it's guaranteed that the UK will continue to harmonise across areas such as licences and vehicle standards. If the EU decide to make another modification to the license structure, as they did a decade or so ago, then you will see the same happening in the UK, simply so that you can take your UK driving license and drive in Europe, and Europeans can come here, of course, and drive on their Euro licenses without us all having to go through the rigmarole of getting an international driving license. So we are not going to see a huge shift away from EU standards on licenses, and the same applies to vehicle standards. Those two are going to remain harmonised, simply so that a bike that's sold in the UK can also be on sale in the EU and vice versa. Now, there's been a lot of talk, for example, about how the UK can change away from the way rider training works, and it's been said to be a Brexit win, when actually all that's been happening is just a simple reassessment within the framework that the original EU directive always allowed for. It's nothing to do with Brexit wins. So why have the BMF withdrawn? Well, since they cite the cost of remaining in FEMA as, quote, phenomenally expensive, one might suspect it's more to do with revenue. And frankly, the BMF have suffered declining membership over the last dozen years or so. And on my bike group, at least, many riders are actually questioning the relevance of both of the two rights groups. Now, meanwhile, going back to MAG in a sort of roundabout kind of way, there was a protest ride around the M25 on Sunday, 20th August, and there were dozens of press reports, presumably thanks to press releases from the organisers that had been distributed to local papers. The event itself was a protest against the imminent expansion of London's ultra-low emission zone, the ULEZ, which, in case you've been under a rock, will extend out to the M25 more or less next Tuesday, August the 29th. Now, the rally itself was being organised by the Stop ULEZ coalition, and it was due to start at a number of locations, including the Ace Cafe on the North Circular Road, plus the services at Cobham, Clackett Lane, Heston, South Mimms and Thurrock. Now, the departures of those groups were timed to be arriving at Rikers at Box Hill at approximately 12:30, and there were going to be a number of speakers there due to make their opposition clear. Now, was it a success? Well, frankly, I don't know, because though I have seen a video of a ride out near Leatherhead where one of the riders actually managed to crash into the car, taking dashcam footage of the bikes going the other way, I've not seen any reports on the scale of the turnout in the motorcycle press yet. Now, MAG are usually very quick out of the traps to report an event like this positively, but the only news coverage I've seen is a video of maybe 100 bikes parked at the Ace Cafe. That was on the News Flare website, and a report that appeared rather bizarrely in a online web paper called The National, which appears to focus on Middle Eastern events. So quite why they were reporting on the ride around the M25 in the UK, I don't know. And they talk of dozens of motorcyclists taking part. Now, I suspect it was rather more than that, but how big it was, no idea. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure what the protest is designed to achieve. Now, with Euro 3 standard motorcycles dating back to 2007 being automatically compliant, what it means is most bikes currently in use are going to be exempt from the charge, and that's what my quick visual count of motorcycles on the road a couple of days ago suggested. And the fact is that many earlier models, such as my 2002 Hornet, are still capable of being registered as compliant with the right paperwork because they meet the emission standards, and anything over 40 years old can be registered as historic, like my CB250 RS, and they are thus exempt too. So I honestly doubt there are that many older motorcycles in regular use that are caught in the non-compliant trap. So there's my opinion on that. I'll be interested to hear what you happen to think about that. So do drop me a line in the comments or after the show, and I will come back to you on that one. Meanwhile, Christine has looked in and said good morning, which is nice to see. Good morning, Christine. Now, don't forget, if you've got a question or comment, anything you want to say, do drop me a line and I will get back to you. I try to do it live if I possibly can. If I can't do it live, it will be after the show. Right, okay, so on with the news anyway. Now, if you want to attract police attention, there's one pretty surefire way of achieving it. And there is the bike in question, and as you can see, if you look closely, what the rider has done is fitted a flip-up number plate. Hampshire Roads Policing Unit, they posted on Twitter, "They ride among us. This rider stopped on the A272 at Cheriton today, had nothing to hide. Well, apart from no licence, never had one, no insurance, no tax, flip-up number plate, even gave false details, which went well until he couldn't remember when he was born. Not the sharpest." Now, the police seized the bike from the 20-year-old man from Southampton on Sunday, August the 13th, and he's been reported for the offences driving without insurance or licence, and as well as having his number plate obscured or not easily readable. Now, the A272 is a pretty well-known biking route, and it does have plenty of crashes along its route, so it's hardly surprising that the police were on the lookout for dodgy riders and their bikes. Now, still to come on today's show, at the end we'll be taking that in-depth look at the Killer Junction collision, and I'll be telling you what to look for and what you can do about it. Right, okay, on to the next section of the show, which is all about what motorbikes we are likely to be seeing arriving in showrooms in the near future. But first, just a quick story. Jarrod Frost, he's topped the 270 mile/hour standing mile on a turbocharged Suzuki Hayabusa. That was at Elvington, and he pinched the record from Guy Martin in the process. Frost hit 274.9 and some bits and pieces miles per hour on his whole shot racing Suzuki Hayabusa. Now, Martin recently set the record at 270.9 miles per hour on his own Hayabusa, which just happens to be partially prepared at least by Frost himself. Okay, so take a look at this. This is what is thought to be a new 2024 Triumph Daytona 660. Now, the bike itself has recently been spotted testing in southern Spain. Now, the item appeared in Motorrad magazine in the German language, and the bike is said to be based on the Trident 660, and they say it looks close to production ready. Well, it certainly does from here. Now, the Motorrad photo shows a machine with a sporty but not extreme riding position. Let's just give you a slightly closer look at that. Let's bring that one in. There it is. It looks similar, rather similar in terms of riding position to the old SV650 actually. The front end is clearly wrapped in a full twin headlight fairing. The forks, though, appear to be new, and the bike appears also to have upgraded radial brakes over the standard Trident, but the rear end appears to be the same. The engine, they say, looks unchanged, as does the underslung silencer, and the implication is the bike will probably pump out the same 80-odd horsepower of the Trident. Shouldn't weigh too much more than the Trident's 189 kilogram curb weight, which isn't too heavy by modern standards. Now, in performance terms, that would slot the bike in as pretty much a head-on competitor to the newish Yamaha R7 that's currently selling for around £8,000, and ballpark with Honda's long-lived CBR 650R, which comes in at around £7,700. Now, price is important because I think the new Triumph will actually struggle to meet these two machines. That's because the naked Trident is already priced at £7,900. Now, that's a similar price to the naked GSX-8S, which is the naked Suzuki, and that bike definitely looks a bit pricey to me at around £8,000. Now, the Street Triple is the next one up in the Triumph model range. That starts at £9,600. So my guess is that Triumph will probably slot the new 660 in at somewhere around £8,800, £8,900, and they'll be relying on the lure of that triple engine to compete with the rather cheaper Honda and Yamaha. Now, to be honest, in this company, the Hornet 90 horsepower 750, which is still listed at around £7,000, is actually looking a bit of a bargain. And so I do wonder, will Honda be tempted to stick a fairing on it and build their own twin-cylinder sports bike? Now, talking of Suzuki, their model range has been stripped right back in the last few years, and apart from the updated 650s, which are still around, rather to my surprise, because I thought they would be replaced by the new 800 twins, the only big engine that Suzuki have left is the 1000cc inline 4, apart from their V-Strom. Now, the GSXR 1000, it continues on sale in some markets, but here in Europe it was withdrawn at the end of last year because it failed to meet Euro 5 emissions limits. Now, interestingly, a detuned version of the earlier version of the motor, taken from the GSXR 1000 K5, which ran between 2005 and 2008, is still on sale, and it can be found in a variety of guises, from a 95 PS version which is capable of being fitted with an A2 license compliant restrictor kit, through the naked GSX S1000, all the way up to the GT Tourer, which has been getting some pretty good reviews incidentally. Now, they all feature the same 999 inline 4 engine. And now there appears to be another sibling in the works. A bike has been spotted out testing, which appears to be based on the 1000cc 4 engine, but this time it has a higher windshield, high bars, and plenty of ground clearance under the motor, and also a big gap between the rear wheel and the bodywork, which all suggests that the bike is aiming at the popular adventure tourer segment, which is currently occupied by machines such as Kawasaki's Versys 1000, the Yamaha 9 Tracer GT, and the very successful BMW F1000 XR. Now, word is that the bike will be called the GSX S1000T, and look for a launch of this bike at the autumn's Milan show. Right, okay, so don't forget, if you have a reminder, set it for 11 o'clock, Sundays and Wednesdays. That's when the show goes out, almost always live, occasionally recorded, and very rarely, as I did over the last 2 weeks, I actually missed a show because I was off on holiday. So do make a date for that, and hopefully join me on Sunday for the next show. And finally, it's time for the last segment of today's show, which is all about trying to understand road hazards and what we can do about them. So today's in-depth piece is a pretty long one, I'll admit, so do stay with me if you possibly can while I talk you through the forgotten crash at junctions. Now, it's hard not to feel a lot of sympathy for a couple who took their vintage 1957 matchless G11 out on the back roads through Fife because they felt their bike wasn't suitable for use on the motorway. Sadly, they ended up being hit by a car at a junction and seriously injured. The crash happened near Cowdenbeath whilst they were on their way to a meeting of the AJS and Matchless Owners Club in Perth. Now, Rod and Helen Towers needed months of hospital treatment for broken arms, broken legs, and so on. And the driver of the car, 22-year-old Ryan Hunter, he was convicted of causing serious injury by dangerous driving. Now, Mr. Towers, who is 69, he said, although the bike is capable of doing speeds over 70 miles per hour, the vibration isn't comfortable, so you avoid the motorways. If you try and do 60, people overtake you and cut in front all the time. It's not a very pleasant ride. So he took the route through Cowdenbeath because he thought it was safer. But as he said, that wasn't a particularly great thought. He also said, I've had 50 years of driving and this is the first actual road traffic accident I've had. So what happened? Well, reports at the time, confirmed by Mr. Towers on a Classic Bike forum, it indicated that the collision actually happened when an oncoming car turned right across the bike's path. Now, Mrs. Towers said, when I saw the car and its wheels were already over the white line and turning at an angle to sweep in front of us, I said, oh shit, and then he hit us. That's how close it was. There was no way we could avoid it. Now, what we've just heard about is the urban killer accident. The scary bit is that hardly anybody knows about this particular crash. Ask virtually any rider from CBT up and they'll tell you all about the time-honoured sorry mate I didn't see you Smidsy collision with the emerging vehicle that pulls out from the rider's left. We are of course in the UK, so rider's left, rider's right in many jurisdictions around the world. Now all around the world the classic Smidsy collision with this emerging vehicle is by far and away the most common crash. Doesn't matter where you look, the UK, Europe, go to Australasia and New Zealand, head off to North America, USA, Canada, even head off to Thailand, and you'll find that this collision, the Smidsy with the vehicle that emerges from the rider's near side, makes up around 70% of urban accidents. Now the trouble is that whilst this is the most common accident by far, it's not the one that's most likely to kill or seriously injure you, me, or any other rider. And it was not until I attended Bike Safe myself back in 2002 that I was surprised to discover the Smidsy is responsible for around 1 in 12 fatalities in London. At least it was back in 2002. As far as I know, nothing has changed. Now, why? Several reasons that the Smidsy crash, though it's so common, has relatively low impact on riders. Firstly, most riders very quickly become aware of the risk of the crash. It's talked about very often on CBT, and even if it's not, most riders will discover that cars pull out in front of them very quickly indeed. So the vast majority of riders on the road are on guard against this crash. Many, in fact, see the emerging vehicle and do something to evade the emerging vehicle altogether. Now, second thing is, generally speaking, we are still some distance from the crash site when we see the events starting to develop in front of us, and most of us will manage to get at least some speed off, even if we don't stop completely. So we won't be travelling very fast at the point of the impact unless we are doing something pretty daft with our speed on a built-up road. Now thirdly, the car is effectively a brick wall because it has pulled out from the near side and it is effectively blocking the road. What it's not doing is actively moving towards us, so we hit it side on. And so the crash itself generally happens at a relatively low speed, and most riders do in fact walk away from, or hobble away anyway, from these collisions. So what makes the crash with an oncoming vehicle turning right the bigger threat? Now, according to those Bike Safe figures, yes, they are 20 years old, but I've no reason to doubt much has changed. This crash accounted in 2002 or thereabouts for almost 50% of the total deaths in London in motorcycle crashes. Why? Well, it's a combination of several issues. Now, firstly, the car is moving towards us and possibly even accelerating into the turn. Maybe it's moved off from a standstill. Most drivers will want to clear through the opposing traffic stream quickly, so they accelerate into that manoeuvre. And it's coming at least partly towards us in that crash. Secondly, as Mrs. Towers actually observed, the suddenness with which the situation develops, the awareness that the oncoming vehicle is starting to turn right, comes out of the blue for many riders, and once that incident starts to develop, there's very little time for the rider to react by braking and losing some speed. And thirdly, nobody ever tells us about it, so what happens is often a surprise, and if we're surprised, you should know by now, our reactions are likely to be even slower. And I'll freely admit that even after all my dispatching time in London and all my instructor training, I really hadn't figured this out either. It was only when I attended this Bike Safe course and got to see the figures from the Met that I began to understand the risk for myself. So combine the factors. The bike will barely have lost any speed. The car is moving towards the bike. That adds some speed to the collision. There's a lack of time for the rider's response, and the result is a hard frontal collision. That's why these particular crashes have serious or even fatal consequences for riders. Now, after the bike safe course, I realised that the way riders frequently coached to ride right of centre in the lane could actually be making things worse, since from the perspective of the oncoming driver who is intending to turn across the oncoming bike's path, the rider in the right of centre position can sometimes be very hard to spot indeed. Think about it. A bike is a third of the width of a car. We know that. If you're riding along in the position where the car behind you's offside headlight would be, for example, that means effectively 2/3 of where the driver would be able to see a car in the same position. It looks like empty space. Now, as it happens, I had a very long correspondence with a rider via Motorcycle Action Group, incidentally, on this very issue not too long ago. He said that he was out riding near the centre line, doing exactly what he'd been told to do by his IAM observer, and that's what he told me, despite there being a stream of oncoming traffic, and he was approaching a junction on his left, and exactly what I've just talked about happened. The car turned out of that stream to turn right into the side road to the rider's left. He only saw the car at the last moment. The driver clearly only saw the bike at the last second. And he said, as he said, after the event, he realised that it was his position that was the problem, and that the driver's perspective was that he was looking at a gap. He said that fortunately for both him and his wife, who was on the back of the bike, he managed to take some evasive action because the driver did see him and stopped dead, which left him just enough space to take evasive action into. Now, he did realise that he was very lucky indeed, because he said had the car continued to turn into the side turning, he was travelling at 60 odd miles per hour on an A road, and it would have probably been game over for him and his wife. Now, whether it was this looked but could not see error because there were other vehicles ahead of the turning car that happened in this collision involving the couple I've just talked about, or whether it's either of the other two issues I so often talk about on Science of Being Seen, that is the looked but failed to see, the classic error, or the looked, saw and misjudged speed and distance, something that happens more frequently than most of us realise. I don't know what caused the crash. It's not in any of the reports, but what I think is fairly clear is that as riders we are neither prepared to detect the threat from a potential oncoming car that may turn right, and we're not given strategies to deal with the problem either. So how do we prevent a similar incident happening to us? Now, first of all, the collision can only happen if there is an opening to the left. So that's the first thing we need to do. We actually need to be on our guard and looking for an opening. It could be a side turning, it could be a delivery access, or it could be like this, a house driveway on the near side, even a field gate. We must search along the near side for these locations. Secondly, we must position where we can see and be seen. Now, if we position too far to the right, although that gives us a great view into the entrance, what it doesn't do is give an oncoming driver a good chance of seeing us. So we have to think about how we can deal with this. We may be able to use a path that starts wide to the right, which gives us a view into the junction, and then angle to the left, which creates a C or BC line of sight towards the oncoming drivers who may be planning to turn into that side road. And that's exactly what the policeman has actually done in this clip from the West Midlands Bike Safe videos on my YouTube channel, incidentally. The rider started wide up out near the centre line, and as you can see from the angle of the bike, which isn't quite square in the lane, as soon as he'd opened up the view into the side turning, he was aware of the two oncoming cars as well as the bend in the distance, and what he was doing was angling back to the left to help increase his clearance to those oncoming vehicles. Thirdly, and very much linked to this see and be seen positioning, we must be looking for both emerging and oncoming vehicles that may be turning. If we only look for vehicles in the junction, we won't pick up that right turn in time. So we need to check for oncoming vehicles and see what they're about to do. We can check the indicators, that's an obvious one, but also look at where the driver is looking. If they are looking to their right, towards that side turning, that's almost certainly where they're going to go. Watch too, a couple of extra hazards here. For drivers who might be swinging out early from behind a stationary queue, if you've got traffic queuing towards you and it's stopped and there's a side turning on the near side, it's a classic decision by a lot, well, motorcyclists do it too, of course, to pull out alongside the outside of the stationary stream and head along the wrong side of the road towards the turning. Most drivers won't do it over more than a car length or two, but if the rider's in the wrong place, the driver won't see them. Now, fifth, now we actually know that the threat from the oncoming right turner is serious, we must prioritise the bigger threat. We may be able to split the difference, pretty much what the rider's doing here, or as I said, we may be able to time our arrival to deal with the two threats one after the other. We may, for example, be able to slow down and make sure that the driver actually sees us before they commit to a turn. We might be able to speed up a little bit and get past the junction before the driver gets there. Slowing down is probably the default option if in any doubt at all about what's going on. You should know this by now really, but the physics of speed works like this. If you double your speed, you quadruple your stopping distance. So it works the other way too. Half your speed, you're stopping 1/4 the distance. And what that means is basically that even small reductions in speed have significantly bigger advantages in terms of reducing stopping distance than most people realise. And the same goes with swerving as well. If we are going to swerve, the less speed we're carrying, the quicker, shorter distance we can travel and move the same distance sideways. So be prepared to slow down, and the next thing you can do is you can think about what you're going to do with the brakes. Now, it's not a bad idea to cover the brakes, maybe even set them up if you're in any doubt. This is a technique I've talked about many times. You basically take the slack out of the brake system. You don't actually really use the brakes. You've just rolled the throttle off, but now you are ready to instantly apply the brakes if you need to. And when you do apply the brakes, brake hard. Swerving alone may not get us out of trouble because there's so little space in what we're seeing here, but at least braking will lessen the impact. If you've got ABS, don't forget it will take care of a front wheel lockup, so you can brake as hard as you like in this situation. And you cover the horn with your other hand and be prepared to use it. The moment there is an inkling the driver might be about to turn, hit the horn. Something else you can watch for is a sudden change of grip on the wheel. That's almost always a precursor to swinging the wheel over and starting that turn. And a long blast on the horn at that point may stop the turning vehicle in its tracks and save a potentially life-threatening collision and reduce it to simply a scary moment. Now, a couple of other things that I would be looking out for. Be careful if there are oncoming vehicles when a vehicle pulls out from your left and turns right in front of you. So in other words, it's come out of the side turning and it's turned into the traffic stream that's going past your right shoulder. The reason for this is it can obscure your sight of an oncoming vehicle that is actually planning to turn into that side road. What sometimes drivers do is they assume that vehicle that's coming out of the side road has blocked traffic from the other direction, and they will turn at pretty much the same time behind it. If you are timing to pass just behind a vehicle turning right, particularly if it's a high-sided vehicle, you are risking running straight into the vehicle that's on the other side of it turning in that you haven't seen. So back off, give yourself some space, make sure that you can actually see that the junction is clear before you proceed into it. The other location to be very cautious is on a right hand bend, because if you think about it now, you've pretty much got a clear view into a junction on your near side because of the angle of the road, but what you can't see is anybody coming the other way who is about to turn into that junction, and they can't see you either. There are a surprising number of riders who seem to be totally unaware of that problem. Now, I'm not blaming the rider. In either case, the towers or the rider from MAG who contacted me. I'm not blaming either of them for the events they experienced, but it is a fact that these collisions are by definition two to tangle events. One road user sets up the potential for the crash, but it will only happen if we ride into it. So it's all about knowing how to be proactive in our own interest. Now, sadly, the crash involving Rod and Helen has had a significant impact on them, as well as the injuries that took months, well actually over a year I think. They're still not fully healed from that, and they found psychological impact from the crash. Rod apparently took a year to get back on the bike, while Helen is still yet to take the plunge. Now I can only wish them well for their future. Now it's time now to wrap up today's Elevenses. Thank you once again for those of you who looked in today. If you have enjoyed the show, please do tell people about it. And if you found this analysis of this crash useful and you think that it can help you out in the future as you ride, why not show your appreciation by buying me a cuppa? It's your support that helps these shows coming. You can support me from just £3 as a one-off payment. That gives you instant access to around 1,000 better biking articles at the moment. You get a month's access to those. If you become a regular supporter, which is a monthly thing, then you'll get all the above, plus you'll get additional content, and if you will also get some free gifts on that. I'm starting to work on those. If you've got a riding problem of your own, you can always commission me to look into it and offer you some bespoke suggestions on how to fix things. So why not pop over now and take a look at www.coffee.com/survival skills. So there you are. That's what you can help me do as I help you with your riding. So that's it for today. It's a lovely sunny day here in London at the moment. The weather is on a bit of a upward blip, which is good. August hasn't been too bad a month, at least down here in the southeast and the south coast. So if you are out there on your bike, of course, today, do stay shiny side up.